Hello and welcome back to the J.K. Feather Ranch channel. We are here today with the lovely Mrs. J.K. Feather Ranch. Tell them, why are we here?
My car doesn't want to shift.
And why doesn't it want to shift? What happens?
The pedal's just stuck on the ground of the car.
So when your clutch doesn't work and the pedal goes to the floor and stays there, it's due to a loss of hydraulic pressure. There are three different things that can cause it, either the master cylinder, the hydraulic hose, or the slave cylinder. So before you can fix anything, you need to figure out which one it is. In order to get a clear view of everything, we'll need to move a few things out of the way. We'll start with the intake, then the battery, then this fuse box can come out. Slide this piece out the top, remove the guard in front, undo the nut on the top and the two nuts at the bottom, remove it from the mounting stud and get it out of the way. Remove these two nuts that hold the wiring harness to the battery tray. Be careful not to drop them. And unclip the ground strap. Remove the four fasteners holding the tray in place. And finally, remove the battery tray. Now when you're doing a job like this with lots of little nuts and bolts, you need a way to remember what went where. One thing that works for me is to get one of these plastic parts organizers from Harbor Freight. They're like $3.99, and each of those rows is about the thickness of a piece of painter's tape. So all you have to do is put each of your nuts and bolts in one little section and label it what it goes to. So now that we have a clear view of everything down here, there is the master cylinder coming from the clutch pedal. That black thing is the hydraulic hose that comes over here and into the transmission. So in order to find out where our loss of pressure is, I'm going to have my wife pump the clutch. And while she's doing that, I'm going to look for leaks. Master cylinder looks good. I don't see anything dripping down out of the hydraulic hose, which unfortunately means that there's only one place left the leak could be. Since the fluid is leaking out between the engine and the transmission, that means our problem is the slave cylinder, which is going to require removing the transmission to fix. Today is not my lucky day, but let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is remove the wheel and jack up the vehicle. Be sure to set it down on jack stands that haven't been recalled. With both sides up in the air, drain the transmission fluid. Remove the cotter pin holding in the axle nut. And remove the axle nut. Sometimes you'll need to knock the axle loose with a hammer, but this one seems to move freely. Remove one bolt holding the knuckle to the strut, and loosen the other, but don't remove it yet. Support the whole assembly with a jack, and you can remove the second bolt. Remove the axle from the back of the hub. Pry it out of the transmission and remove it from the vehicle. Put one bolt in loosely so everything isn't just hanging, and repeat this process on the other side. To remove the fender liner, first remove the one screw and two push pins holding on the mud flap. The front is held on by 3 Torx screws. One more Torx screw underneath. A push pin here. Another push pin here, and a bunch of push pins here. You don't want to watch me remove them all, so I didn't film it. Remove the ground wire from the transmission and tuck it out of the way. Remove the temperature sensor. Unscrew this wiring bracket and get it out of the way. Remove the clutch hose by pulling up on this clip and pulling it out of the transmission. Next, we'll need to remove the airbox. Start by unhooking the MAF sensor. Remove the 2 bolts holding it in place. Unhook this hose. Loosen the clamp, and you can remove the airbox from the engine. Unhook the shifter cables from the transmission. Remove this guard above the passenger side axle. It's held on by 2 bolts and 1 nut. The nut is kind of hard to see, but it's on a stud above the guard. Now you have access to gently tap the shifter cables out of their brackets. There are 2 more bolts above the guard that need to be removed. And 4 on the bottom of the bell housing. Next, we'll need to support the engine with a jack and remove the lower transmission mount. Remove 2 more bolts on the front of the housing. And remove the 3 bolts holding the upper mount to the transmission. There are 3 more bolts on top holding the transmission to the engine. Now you can wiggle the transmission apart from the engine and drop it out the bottom of the car. Don't forget to remove this wire from the bracket before you break it. With a bit of finesse and a couple of sore arms the next day, it's all the way out. Here we see the old slave cylinder. Notice the protective boot is completely gone. I'm guessing this let dirt and debris get in and ruin the seals, causing the leak. Time to spray down the housing with brake cleaner.
That was so satisfying to watch.
Wasn't it?
Yes.
And remove the old slave cylinder. After installing the new one, I could technically be done, but since the car has over 100,000 miles and everything is already apart, I might as well install a new clutch. After removing the 6 bolts holding it to the flywheel, you can just pull the pressure plate off and then remove the clutch disc. Be sure to clean up the flywheel. Before installing new parts, I noticed a small problem with the alignment tool that came in the kit.
Really?
After making a small modification, that'll work well enough. After lining up the pressure plate with the dowels on the flywheel, I hand tightened 2 of the bolts to hold the clutch disc in place while I fine-tuned the alignment. I applied blue Loctite to the other 4 bolts before installing them with an impact. I then removed the 2 I put in by hand to apply Loctite as well. Before reinstalling the transmission, it's a good idea to lightly grease the input shaft so everything goes together smoothly. With my wife lifting from above with a ratchet strap and my cat giving me her encouragement, I was able to get the transmission back into place. I didn't film it at the time, but I had to remove the transmission mount to make enough room. It supports itself well enough to get one of the bolts tightened down, followed by the other 3 on top. With the transmission held in place securely enough, you can reinstall the mount. It's held on by 2 bolts on top and 2 more underneath. Jack up the engine and transmission until the holes line up with the mount. And reinstall the 3 bolts. Reinstall the lower mount. And you can lower the engine back down. Reinstall this wiring bracket, this ground wire, and the other front housing bolt, as well as the 4 on the bottom. Along with these 2 above the passenger side axle, and this guard. Reinstall the shifter cables. And the airbox. Clean up the mating surfaces on the axle. And grease it where it slides into the transmission. Grease the axle seal as well. Remove the bolt holding the knuckle up. And reinstall the axle. You'll know when it's all the way in. Lightly grease the splines. And install the axle into the hub. Reinstall the bolts. And install the axle nut. Repeat for the other side. Clean up the threads on the temperature sensor, clean out the hole, apply RTV, and install it into the transmission. Remove the plug from the slave cylinder and insert the hose. Before bleeding, top off the brake reservoir. Bleed the clutch using a bottle with some brake fluid at the bottom and a clear plastic tube. Place the tube over the bleeder valve, release the inner of the two clips, and slide the tube back slightly to open the valve. Have a helper inside the car press and hold the clutch pedal, and release it once you've closed the valve. Repeat this process until there are no more bubbles, only clean fluid. Unhook the tubing, clean the area, and install the cap. Top off the brake reservoir. Reinstall the battery tray. Reinstall the fuse box. Reinstall the battery. A bit of paper towel can help hold a bolt upside down in a socket during installation. Reinstall the intake. Remove the fill plug from the transmission. Feed a piece of tubing through the engine bay and attach a funnel. Insert the other end into the fill hole. This car specifies a 75W85 GL4 transmission fluid. I'm using Redline MT85. Do not use a GL5 or you can damage the brass parts in the transmission. It takes about 3 quarts. You'll know it's full when fluid comes out the hole. Reinstall the fender liner. Reinstall the wheel. Lower the jack until the wheel just touches the ground. Torque the lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds. Lower the car the rest of the way. Torque the axle nuts to 185 foot-pounds. Reinstall the hubcaps. Test the clutch for proper operation. Start the engine and shift through the gears. The shifter should move freely. Any resistance means the clutch isn't fully disengaging, and there's likely still air in the lines. So that's how to replace a clutch and slave cylinder on a Nissan Versa, or pretty much any other front-wheel drive vehicle. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like and leave a comment below, and subscribe to this channel for more videos. Thanks for watching!